Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Shift webinar series for students and recent graduates. My name is Kristen Gribbin. I work as an Alumni Engagement Officer within the College of Arts and Science. As we gather here today, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. The Shift webinar series was created to help prepare our undergraduate students, graduate students, and recent graduates for life after graduation. The online sessions feature alumni speakers and presentations focused on how to prepare you to become the leaders the world needs after graduation. This year, we will be hosting 4 sessions over the next 2 months. Dawn, can you change slides? Before we jump into the event, I'd like to first go over a couple housekeeping items. If you would like to see a live transcript of this event, please click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Show subtitle will show your subtitles at the bottom of your screen, and view full transcript will show you a sidebar of the full transcript. Everyone's microphones will be disabled during the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Enter your question in the text box and click send. Questions will be answered later on in the presentation. We will now dive into the actual event. The College of Arts and Sciences has over 53,000 alumni alone. Alumni who have graduated from the College of Arts and Science have paved the way for your success and set a high standard to which you can aspire to. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dawn Warren and Roberta Braid, who have both taken time out of their busy schedules to be here with us today. Dawn holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology from the University of Saskatchewan and a coaching certificate from the Neufeld Institute. Dawn is currently an employer and community engagement coordinator who collaborates with employers, community leaders, and career development professionals to support student career success as they transition into the world of work. Dawn facilitates employment-focused workshops with campus partners and meets with students on a one-on-one basis to support their transition from student life to professional employment. Roberta has a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Winnipeg. She currently works at the Student Employment and Career Center at USask as a career counselor, supporting students in exploring their career options, identifying goals, and planning next steps. I'll now pass it over to Dawn and Roberta to go over our content today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for that introduction. So today we're going to be going through a presentation we have on interviewing, and it'll be Dawn and myself going back and forth with the content. So as we're going through, please feel free, put in any questions in the chat. We really want it, to be as interactive as possible. So we'll try and address some of these as we're going through if they make sense at the time. And if we don't get to them as we're going through the presentation, we'll for sure get to them at the end. So you'll have a chance for a lot of interaction, should that be what you want today. Anything else, Dawn, you wanted to add before we get started? Nope. All right. Okay, so today we're going to be going through everything interview related. So interview chat, spilling the beans 101. So it's really about what's your story and how do I convey my story. So pouring over your interview to-do list. So we're going to go through preparing for the interview day. So what to do before an interview, what to do on the actual interview day, and what you need to be doing post-interview, so after you have that interview. So I want you to think about your interviewing, your skills, and your confidence with how you feel right now. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least confidence in your interviewing skills, 10 being 100% confidence that you know kind of all the tips and tricks and are ready to go forward. So think about where you might put yourself on that scale right now with what you know about yourself and interviewing. For example, if you put yourself at a 5, think about what makes that a 5 and not lower. So what have you learned about yourself in interviewing that gives you the confidence to put it at that 5? And then I want you to go one step further and think about what would take it 1 number higher. So what is maybe the key missing information right now that you would need to take it from a 5 to a 6? What is that missing information? And we're going to revisit this at the end, and hopefully we will have created some of that content to give you the confidence to take it one step higher. So when looking at the interview purpose, it's really an open invitation to learn more about each other. So if you think about the very first step in preparing for your interview, it's understanding what the actual purpose is of why you are being brought into that interview. What is it that they are asking for? What is the need? Why are you coming to the actual interview? And it's an invitation for both of you. Oftentimes, we might feel a little bit intimidated or nervous because we feel like the person interviewing us kind of holds all the power. But you're the goods. You're the one that they're bringing in. So you're the one that they need, right, to fulfill something. So this is an opportunity for you to also learn about the company you're going into, to find out if it is also a good fit for you. So it's equal. It goes both ways. They're going to be asking you things about your skills, your knowledge, your experience, your personality, your values, your strengths. So what's unique to you? And you're going to be asking them around the position, company culture, and work team. So it really is that equal opportunity. I'm going to shift it over to Dawn. She's going to talk about some things around accepting the interview, knowing what you signed up for, what type of interview you're going to be walking into, so you can feel really prepared in knowing kind of what to expect when you're walking through that door, and you can feel really confident.
Thanks, Roberta. So yeah, and everything I love, like what Roberta was saying around conversation, and it is, if you take away from that you're being put on the spot, really keeping that mindful that it's a conversation. And so when you're coming to the conversation, there's different ways that it may present itself. So there's the one-on-one, so it's just as what it is, like, just one other person, which if it's one-on-one, in most cases, it likely is someone from the human resources team. And it's kind of that first point of contact, that first vetting, just to make sure that taking that next step to a more formal interview is in the best interest of both parties, that you're understanding the job. Sometimes they do bring in compensation, but just to make sure that before they go to that formal stage, that you're able to connect to make sure that you're both on the same page for the job. The panel seems to be the more common one, and that can be from anywhere from 2 to 5. I think 5 is definitely the extreme. It's probably 2 to 3. And this is where you definitely probably have someone from the human resources team, a hiring manager. There may also be a team, like a colleague, or there might be a technical expert that's also sitting at the table, depending on the role that you're applying for. And so that would be the in-person, and then you kind of, even the virtual. The panels on the virtual is kind of like the Zoom. It's kind of set up the same way. There'll just be a few more faces on the other side of the screen. Then you've also got the phone interview. The phone interviews as well, kind of that pre-screen. It's where the human resources person more than likely is calling you up just to get a sense of feel for what position you applied for, why you're interested in it. So it's just kind of that beginning stage. As well, something that's becoming a little bit more prevalent is the pre-recording. So when you apply for a position, sometimes what they'll do is say, hey, can you go on to this website link? They'll have some questions that they ask. And you usually get 2 to 4 minutes to answer each question. And then they watch that, and then they assess if you're going to go to the next step within that. My understanding is, depending on the company, but most cases you get an opportunity to read the question, give some thought as to what your answer would be, and then hit record. And usually you get to even re-record. So it is really about just learning your communications, right? So you can articulate yourself well, as well as why are you interested. So it just gives them, depending on the job, maybe depend on when you have that as part of the process. And then the second or subsequent interview, again, that's after you've kind of had that initial, you go to the next stage. The one thing I do want you to keep in mind though with interviews, until you have an offer in hand, no matter what you're doing with the company, it's an interview. So even if they have you come to an informal lunch, meeting the team, whatever that is, keep in mind you're being interviewed, and not to make you paranoid, but you are being watched. You're being um, interviewed in different social settings, business settings, and stuff like that. So just keep in mind that it is part of the interview, which is great because you're also getting to see what that company is like in those different settings. But I just need you to keep that top of mind. So you want to make sure in terms of dress, appearance, that you're making sure that you're setting your best foot forward. And in terms of dress, the one thing I would suggest is just make sure that, again, it might not be the corporate dress going forward, but it's okay to dress in a suit. It's okay to be respectful. It's a sign that, you're showing up, you're putting your best foot forward. And a lot of times when you wear a suit or something like that, you feel better. It's like putting on your Superman or Wonder Woman costume. It just gives you that power. It gets your body in alignment with, supporting you when you're nervous and stuff. So it's better than kind of doing that casual dress because then you go into casual mode a little bit more. So that's kind of the purpose of kind of as well dressing up. If you're doing it virtual, I think we've been doing this for enough time that we know, but it's kind of like you'd want to make sure your background, like what I've got right now, is way too distracting and too much going on for an interview. I would take the picture down. You just have the black or the blank slate behind the window, so you don't have any distractions. So you're the center of attention. You want to look at your camera, your placement. You definitely would do a dry one with a friend or someone that could kind of listen on the other side, make sure you're set up properly and hop on beforehand to make sure you've got the right link, all of that stuff where I think 2 years in, we probably got a good sense of this, but we get nervous and we forget. So it's absolutely okay to hop on, practice with it ahead of time. The other thing when you're doing virtual, you are missing a little bit of that body language and connection talk. So you want to be mindful that when you're looking at the camera where it's set up properly. So right now you can't see that I'm talking crazy with my hands because I do. They're below the level. So you kind of want to keep that lower so it's not distracting because it's one thing when you're in person, but on a camera, it's a lot more distracting. So those are some of kind of the highlights on that slide. And then we'll move along to the next one, Roberta. I think I probably even covered some of this a little bit, but this, even though I like when we say less typical, and I was kind of looking at that, I was like, I think it's actually becoming more typical because with going to hiring now in terms of competencies and skills, more and more employers are looking for ways to ensure that you have that, like to verify them. So there is a presentation. So if you're probably having to sell or influence or make presentations to clients, and that's part of your role, there may be a presentation part to it. I know leadership positions, a lot of times they are asking for presentation because it's like, okay, here's, the strategy or the problem we're having. What's your solution? So they do, again, want to see what your facilitation style is and how you can do a presentation. Can you do a presentation? Group, they might have you do a group project. So again, with some of the student positions, they might have you come in, give you some problem solving, like with the case studies, and have you work together. It depends on how many positions a lot of times they're hiring for. Sometimes that's just an easier way for them to kind of weed through a lot of the applicants. Role playing, I know border services is shifting more to that. They're giving you hypothetical scenarios, and they actually in the interview are having you role play. So it really depends on what that looks like. And then assessments and testing and a lot of our technical positions, they are going to want to test your aptitude. They're going to want to say, okay, well, you said you're a novice, you're an intermediate, you're an expert. Okay, here's our test. Here's what we need you to know if you can do this or not. So the one thing I would always suggest, especially in that when you get that phone call right up front to set up, is ask, what is the interview format? And the recruiter will happily tell you that. So that way you're not blindly waiting, say, okay, well, what's going to happen after this one? And oh my gosh, what's going to happen? It's okay to say, hey, is there anything that I need to prepare for this interview? Do I need to bring anything? And that will really help you prepare. And they're willing to share that information. So definitely ask that question. So you're not going in completely blind and not knowing what's going on and then just raising that level of uncomfortability. So please advocate for yourself. Remember, it's a conversation. It's like Roberta said, it's a fit for both of us. So you're just having a conversation, right? It's like, okay, great. I'm looking forward to meeting with you. What is it, the style? What do I need to prepare? What can I bring in to prepare, and share with you? that's all perfectly okay and acceptable to ask.
And that's really good advice, Dawn, because as I'm looking at this list, I'm thinking I've had each of these in in the last 20 years in different interviews. I've had to do each of them, and there was only one where it was told to me ahead of time that this
Yeah.
is a presentation because I needed to bring something. But the others I was surprised with the role play, the assessment, the testing. I had no idea that was coming. So that's a great tip to kind of ask that ahead of time so you
Well,
can be
right?
really prepared.
Yeah, and the recruiter, even though they work for the company,
Mhm.
they are advocating because they want the best fit. And everybody knows interviewing is scary, right? Like everybody knows that. Even if you're like, I've done thousands of interviews being an HR practitioner on the other side, but guarantee every time I go to an interview, I'm on the other side of the table, even though I know the questions, I know what they're gonna, I'm nervous, right? Because you're
Mhm.
putting yourself out there. And they want you to succeed. They want you to be
Mhm.
able to share your best version of you. And so they are going to share you. They shouldn't be trying to trip you up. And if they are, I think that just tells you a little bit about the workplace and the culture. And then you're going to decide, like, is that the company I want to be a part of?
Mhm. Yeah,
So
100%.
back to you.
So, interview preparation, taking the steps to ensure your best outcome. So, it's really looking at these 4 areas. It's doing the self reflection, doing your homework, right? Doing your research, making sure that your resume is updated, and then reviewing. So, making sure you're looking and reviewing all of those 3 steps before you actually go in on the day of your interview. So the first step is really knowing who you are, right? So really getting clear on that, taking some time to reflect back who you are and why you're a fit for this position. So making sure you have kept a copy of the job posting, really looking at what's highlighted on there, what they're looking for in terms of education, experience. But then on the other side, right, the transferable skills, the unique things they're looking for that you can fill. So think about your personality, think about your strengths, think about the goals that you have and how that matches with the job description. Think about the career readiness competencies. So things like critical thinking and problem solving, technology, communication. All of those things are really important and often are highlighted within a job posting as the transferable skill set, not the technical skill set. And those are the things that are really unique to you because everybody could have the technical skill set, the education requirements. What's going to make you stand out is what is different about you. How are those things going to be a fit for the job role? And if you don't know how you're unique, how can you connect the dots for that employer? So you need to take the time out to really do that reflection and think about examples, right? You want to be able to kind of back these things up with some previous experience. So, where was your personality and your strengths utilized and really appreciated? Where have you showcased that it really was a success? So, make sure you have some examples that you can bring to the table. Second step is the research. So, you have the job posting, but you need to do your homework. You need to find additional information. So that's where you're going to be researching the company. You're going to be looking up, are they on social media? What are they posting on their platforms? Do they have a LinkedIn profile? What does their website say? Looking for things like their mission, their vision, their value statements, what projects are they working on? What things are trending in industry right now? What are they focusing on with those industry trends? And really think about how you authentically connect into those things. So if you read their mission, their vision, their values, the projects they're working on, the trends in industry, what are you actually excited about? What are you actually passionate about? Where can you actually see yourself, not just supporting this role, but the organization as a whole and the industry as a whole, because they want to see that you've made the time to make those connections. So think about how you can impact them and how you can support them. The other thing you also want to be doing in your research is around salaries. So make sure that you are taking the time to find out what the typical salary ranges are for that position. So you have some figures of ranges in your mind before you go to that interview. So your resume is that third point. So again, really knowing your unique menu of goods, making sure that those are highlighted on your resume and they're matching up with the job posting in the company or organization that you are applying to. So know what you have to offer, know how it relates, be able to speak confidently about this on your resume and know that resume inside and out, because a lot of times they're going to use that resume when they're interviewing you. So if you put something on there and maybe kind of forgotten about it and then they ask you about it and want some examples, you have to make sure that you have those at the forefront and you're ready to speak about them confidently. The other thing on your resume, with your reference section, make sure before you go to an interview that you have your references. So if you haven't included them on your resume, you need to have those ready, whether it's virtually or in person. If it's in person, you need, a written copy of those. Virtually, you want to make sure you have them in an email that you can send them. So you need to make sure that those are updated and ready to go. The other thing with references is at the interview stage, this is where you want to make sure that your references are aware that you've interviewed for this position. So make sure you send them a copy of the job posting, let them know you've interviewed, send them a copy of your resume. That way they're prepared if they get a call for a reference and they're not caught off guard. So the last one is reviewing. So again, kind of going over all of those things, making sure you're prepared. And then knowing some of the typical and tricky questions. So how are you going to simmer right through that? How are you going to be prepared for that? There are some typical questions that are asked a lot, no matter what industry you're in. And there's also some tricky questions, which, yes, on the surface may seem tricky, but once you know the formula for them, they're actually really not that tricky. And if you know yourself well and you've done your homework, you'll be able to answer these with confidence. It's just making sure that you're prepared. One thing you can do is come to us and book a mock interview, because we know these questions and kind of all the tips and tricks. We'll go through obviously some of it today and how to answer them. But if you want that direct one-on-one practice, then definitely book a mock interview with Career Services and we can support you with that. All right, so I'll put it back over to Dawn. She's going to go through some of these questions and what they are and how to prepare for them.
Okay, thanks, Roberta. So with the questions, like everything Roberta said is like, yeah, please do that. The big thing is know thyself. And I just made a couple of notes that before I jump to the questions, Roberta, I might just touch on is also ask who's interviewing you, because in the research part, if you find out who's at the table or is going to be interviewing you, because we have social media and we have LinkedIn and they're going to check you out, you can also go check them out. And it's really helpful because if you go look at the LinkedIn profile for the hiring manager, even the HR person, it'll give you some insights into how to relate to them. You might find common links and you just kind of get a sense of who they are as well. So it'll help you in terms of how to answer your questions. Because again, it's learning about the personality style. So if you know yourself, you get to then learn about others, and then it's kind of that interconnectivity, which you can really utilize and capitalize on within your interview. The other thing is make sure you save the job posting, because we've had students that come say, okay, what do I do? I applied, but I didn't download it, and the posting's closed, and now I can't get the posting. And yeah, it would be very awkward to ask the HR person for the job posting, and I highly recommend you don't do that. So make sure when you're applying that in your as one file, you put the resume that you use, you put the cover letter, and you put the job posting in that file. Because as you're going to go through the job application process, you're going to maybe tweak and modify your resume. So like Roberta said, they're going to be asking you questions based on the information of that resume. So if you have a different version and you speak to something that you put on another one, it will look really awkward. And then they'll start to, doubt the accuracy of your resume that you submitted. So 3 key points that you need to keep an eye on. Now, with the typical questions, they really aren't. Again, even like Roberta said, the trick questions really aren't tricky. I think it's just if you don't know yourself and you haven't done preparing, they seem really difficult. So they're going to start out the interview process really with a question like, tell me about yourself and why you applied for this position in this organization. Why is this interesting to you? And again, sometimes people are like, that's a really tricky question because like, how do you want me to tell you about myself in like 2 minutes or less. And at the end of the day, one, it's an icebreaker, but it's also a way, if you really think about it, if you really get to know how to answer this question and interview to interview, you don't have to change it a lot. You can tweak and modify, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty consistent. So we do recommend that you spend some time writing this one down, getting a good sense of what you would say and how to open it up because it'll get you comfortable. Plus, how you launch this question really sets the tone for the next 45 minutes to hour that you're in that interview. So one of the key acronyms that we like to use at the Career Center to help you to remember how to answer, break it down, is the PAUSE acronym. So it's like personal, academic, work, and skills. And so when we're talking about personal, we're not saying that you start talking about the 7 kids you have and the marriage and all that stuff. It's personal, professional. So you just want to kind of give them some kind of information that you can connect them to you a little bit. And this is helpful if you've read their LinkedIn profiles, then you can think, okay, this would be helpful to know because I read on their profile that they like this hobby or they have this background. So you can kind of weave and personalize that for yourself, but also keeping in mind who's at the table. So that's why that research piece is really helpful. And academic, now I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that because in all honesty, especially when you're going to industry, they've read your resume, you've verified it, it's there. So don't spend a lot of time on that part. You can just kind of, again, stipulate that you have this education and here's how it applied to the position. So you're weaving it back to the job and a company. Same with the work. You're not going to give your work history here. You're going to touch on the key things in terms of your employment and life experience history that you want to be part of the conversation today at the interview. Okay. So that's what you're going to highlight. It's kind of like that introductory part. And same thing with the skills. You're going to look at the job posting and say, okay, these are the skills that they're looking for. And I know that probably everyone that's interviewing as well has these, but I think these are some asset skills too. So throw those in because if you put that in at the beginning, you're also inviting them to come and say, probe and say, hey, tell me more about this. Remember, it's about a conversation. So if there's information that you want them to kind of touch on or that introductory that it's kind of like, here's what I'm going to package for you in the next hour, that's how you want to answer that question. It's very strategic in that way. They may go in and asking why you chose the program, especially as a student. They may ask, why did you choose that program? What was it that you're passionate about? And it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know, it chose me, or right, like if you know the path. So it's more about the why and getting to know you behind it. There's no right or wrong. It's not a tricky question. They're just trying to get to know you. Okay. The other thing is, let's see, we talked about like why you're interested in the position. So knowing the industry, knowing the company, like Roberta said, that's going to be key. And this other thing is it's not for you to just spew off stats about their company. Okay. They know the website, they've read it. It's now you've read it and they want to know you researched it, but how does it connect to you? How does it connect to what is, your strengths, your passion? You've got to weave you into those questions. Other things are like some of the research that you've done. If it's applicable to the job, bring that in. They may ask you what some of the awkward ones are, and what's your short and long-term goals? And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know long-term. And it's okay to say, I don't know what overall long-term goes. I know my path may pivot and grow, but here's what I'm thinking today. It's okay to kind of put that out. And a lot of times it's looking at the company and say, I'd love to start in this role because I could see one day I could go and work hopefully in this department or in, this part. So if they see that you have some longevity with them, whether or not that happens, they know it may or may not. But if they see that you can see a future with them, that's actually really enticing to employers as well. We talked about what's interesting about the position. And again, it's what you can do for them. So why are you interested in the position? Even though they're saying like, why are you interested? Remember, you've looked at the job description, they're hiring, they have a vacancy, they have a need. So you want to say, this is why I'm interested, because I can bring this value. My skill set could help you succeed or achieve this goal you have. So you always want to remember they're filling the spot. So it's about them. It's not about you. So it's how can you go into that team, into that organization, help them with their goals, their problems or challenges, so that they can move forward. Because if you make them look good and succeed, guess what? You do the same. So that's where, keep that in mind. You always want to weave and connect back to that job posting. So researching and knowing that job posting inside out, so key. And so again, when we get to the tricky questions, I always get excited about this. Sometimes, I'll be honest, there are tricky questions. Sometimes it's not nice, but sometimes they will even throw you one, like, what kind of animal are you? You know, if one of the tricky questions, if I talk to 3 of your top friends, how would they describe you to me? Okay, so don't start thinking of your top 3 friends, say, oh my God, what would they say? What you would say in your mind is like, okay, so what they want to know are, what are my top attributes? So this is what I would want my friends to say internally. That's what you're saying. This is what they would say, right? So don't worry, they're not going to go interview your friends. So this is where that gets tricky. They're just trying to slip you up that you're going to go into looking at that third person, but you can't predict that. So stick with, what would I want them to say? And that's the way you're going to speak at it. When they talk about salary, and Roberta brought that up, it varies. Some of them will ask it right at the beginning, even like that pre-interview stage. So you want to do your research and make the band big enough. So the one thing is knowing about pay bands too, that even if there's a min and a max, especially unionized government environments, you only hit the max if you stayed for 20 years. Okay. So really, when you look at that pay band, you will look at the bottom end, the minimum, you look at the midpoint, and really you think of that midpoint is the ceiling for that pay band, because at a midpoint you're hitting is you would be fully functioning and know that job well. That is what that means. So when you go in to kind of give them a salary, give them about a $10,000 range. Know what your minimum is, though. Know, what can I live on? Like, no one expects you to live below the poverty line, right? So you really have to, again, done that research. What do I need to exist? What's fair in that role? And then give them some room so that you don't talk yourself out of the appropriate pay, as well as you don't talk yourself out of a job. Because if you put it too high, they're not even going to interview you, and you won't know why you didn't go to the next interview. And the other thing that you can add to the salary question is, if you're not sure, you can say, well, this is what I'm thinking of the pay band. However, I would anticipate that you would pay and offer me a wage that offers, based on my experience, my education, and in alignment with internal equity. And then that way it covers them. And all you're saying is, all I'm asking for is fair pay, right? That's a way to articulate that and take that uncomfortability away. And again, like that one, what would references say about you? I don't know, phone them, find out. No. It's really, they're trying to second guess that stuff. So don't go into that. Stick with what you know. And again, keep in mind, what do you want to share? And when they go into your greatest weakness, think of a technical skill set, think some aspect on that job. And it's okay to say, you know what, I saw I need to know this software. I need to understand this. I don't know how to utilize that software. However, I learned this software at this company and I was able to figure it out. And you know, if you were able to give me access and training, I'm a quick learner, I could get up to speed. Strengths, lean into the strengths that are your interpersonal skills, those soft skills, as we say. Those are the ones, because a manager can't teach you integrity, accountability, initiative, right? Go into those. Stay away from perfectionism, because for a manager, that's kind of a nightmare trait, because how do you stop a perfectionist and tell them it's perfect already to move forward? So if that's a habit, don't even put that on the table. Don't mention it as a weakness or a strength. Just stay away from that one, because you just keep sliding down and it's just not good. So stay away from that one. Okay. And it's, if you've been in an interview, most cases, they are behavioral based. So Roberta already kind of spoke into that, as knowing your practice. So you're going to want to give them examples. So when they ask you a question, they're looking for a past situation, because what they're looking for is that past behavior is indicative of future behavior. The only caveat that comes with that is that you've done some self-reflection and you might have learned from that experience, which is then great if you share that and say, upon reflection, here's what I've learned and here's how I've done it differently in other examples. And that's great. That means you're teachable, you're open to positive, constructive feedback. And that's huge as well, because they know as a leader, they can come to you and you're open. And that's what you want to be mindful of. But this is where you really do want to sit down, like Roberta said, and prepare, have those examples. So think about conflict, and conflict means disagreement, not agreeing. So think of those kind of things as well. And you want to prepare it out because you want to be very mindful of what you're saying and not saying. And honestly, coming to mock interview, it's the best way I can say to walk yourself through those, because you don't always know what you say and don't say. And so part of the behavioral interview questioning is looking at it this way. What's the situation? What did I do? What was the task? What was I being asked to do? The challenge or the conflict or whatever that, what is that piece? Then going into the actions, what were those results and steps that I took? And then the result, the outcome. And then, like I said, then you could add that reflection piece and I'll reflect back. Now, the one thing to remember, number one, you're the star of the show. So you're not going to talk about your teammates that might have been a part of it and say, well, and Tommy wasn't feeling good and he was doing this. It's like, no, focus on you. And what you want to do is set the stage. Here was the example. And the nice thing is if you set it up properly, you could use the same example throughout your interview in different questions, because you could say, hey, when I talked about this one in terms of time management, well, that same project, here's a conflict that came up in it, and I had this disagreement with this colleague, and this. So you can layer it, and it almost becomes a story that you can weave through it. So you don't have to have a different example for every question. You just have to know how to set it up and then continue to build off of it. So don't talk about the whole scenario right at the beginning, but make sure you give the result, the outcome. So often people will explain the scenario, the task, the action, and they forget to share the outcome. They don't bring it to a conclusion. So make sure you definitely do that.
And just adding on that, with the results is thinking about like the self-awareness piece, right? Employers want to see that you're self-aware, that you've thought about this situation, you've thought back and what you could be doing differently or better if that situation were to happen again. And it's okay to point that out and saying, and reflecting on the results, I learned this about myself in this process, and this is what I would actually do differently going forward. Because that's a huge component of any job, is self-awareness and learning.
Great point. And it's about you, not the other person, because you can't change the other person. And I would stay away from conflict with supervisors, because that's a slippery question unless you really know what you're saying. And knowing your rights. Absolutely. This is one of the biggest things, that if you're not familiar with employment standards, what your rights are, questions you can answer and ask, absolutely need to understand this. So questions about personal marital status, anything that honestly is personal to you, they cannot ask that stuff. Okay, do you plan on having children? Do you have children? They cannot ask these questions. And I know sometimes you may have a hiring manager in there that tries to sneak it in anyways. And so if there is an HR person in the room and someone asks you an illegal question, don't be quick to answer. If you hear, like, the manager says, so you're planning to have children in 5 years, just pause, look at the HR person, because at that point they should hop in and say, sorry, don't answer that question, that's not appropriate. Or you can just say, you know what, I really haven't figured that out today, I'm focused on this job and seeing what I can do. So you definitely find a way to massage through that stuff. But I will tell you, especially when you go back to that tell me about yourself question, if you start telling them about your 7 kids and your plan to have children and stuff, while it's illegal for them to ask you, it's not illegal for them to allow you to keep talking and oversharing. So you really want to be careful that you set up that question about tell yourself at the beginning, and you don't. This is about your competencies, you as an employee. It has nothing to do with anything like if you're planning on taking a vacation or whatever, like, you need daycare, none of that stuff. That comes at the negotiation stage. At this stage, they're just deciding, are you the best fit for the organization? And if a company decides that they want you, they will look at flexibility and see how they can support you. And that comes at the next stage, okay? Not at the interview stage.
And yeah, just to further add on to that, because that's a great list on some of the things that we know they can't ask are around nationality, age, religious affiliation, political views, gender. Those are some of the top ones that they may try and sneak in there, that they're not allowed to. And another strategy, if they ask you something, say about religious affiliation, obviously that's not applicable, it's not legal. Put it back on them, put the heat back on them and ask them, can you tell me why that would be important to this role? See what they say, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to have a good answer. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And that's a great strategy. That, or you can ask them, like, tell me about your, like, great question. How does that fit in your world? Like, did you know that you wanted to have children right away? Like, how was that? And like, you just shift that and that's it. And so instead of just saying, no, you don't have a legal right to answer that,
yeah,
they don't, but you might end the interview. But if you handle it, and that could be the tricky thing too, they might see, how do you handle inappropriate questions? Because if you're, especially if your role is going to be dealing with challenging clients, they might trick you. I hope they don't. That's not a good way to do it, but people do all kinds of stuff. So
yeah. So now you've done, a lot of the hard work, right? You've done the reflecting on yourself. You've got your documents in order. You've prepared, you've done your research. Now it's go time. So now it's day of interview. So some things that you want to make sure that you have available, you want to have, if it's virtual, copies of your resume that you can easily forward out, right? Maybe they need a copy of that at the last minute. So have that accessible and ready. If it's in person, bring extra copies of your resume. There could be additional people there that may need some extra copies. Bring a notepad and pen so you can make notes as you go for anything that might be important. Come with questions for them. So think about what you want to be asking them. You're going to want to have, 3 to 5 really well thought out questions. Some typical questions are things like, what does a typical workday look like? Maybe what have others really enjoyed about this position? What do you think some of the greatest challenges in this position are? How would you describe the work environment and company culture? What are the next steps in this interview process? That's a really important one too, that sometimes gets forgotten. And then you leave and you're like, oh, I forgot to ask, are they going to contact me regardless? What's this going to look like? So at least you know what the next steps are and the timelines for that. Things around salary, benefits, those are not to bring up at this time. That's to talk about later if you actually get offered the position. That would be the appropriate time to bring those up. I should mention too, just going back here, one other thing to think about, and I know that Dawn talked about this a little bit, was around your dress, right? So making sure that you're dressed appropriately, dressing, a notch up, not so it's super formal, but formal enough that you look professional, and it's more than casual professional. You want to be dressed professionally. Arriving 10 to 15 minutes early, whether it's virtually or in person, is always important. So you make sure that you're there on time and account for things maybe to go wrong, right? So making sure that if it is virtual, that 10 to 15 minutes early, make sure that your technology is actually working that day, even though you've tested out previously. Make sure if you're driving there, the routes to get there, the parking situation. If you're going by bus, make sure you know the bus routes and make sure you have a backup plan. Those are all things you want to be thinking about, so you can actually get to your interview and be prepared. The other thing is, try to remember, even though it can feel very stressful, it's also exciting, right? You have this amazing opportunity to have this conversation. And you've been invited by someone to have this conversation. So it's exciting as well. Don't ever forget the excitement, opportunity factor. And sometimes it really is letting go of the outcome, because you can't control that. So you can only control being yourself and being in the moment. You've prepared for it. So remember to enjoy it. It's a wonderful opportunity to enjoy. So after the interview, first of all, give yourself a pat on the back. You did it. You showed up. You put your best foot forward. So that's a win, no matter what the outcome is. Then take some time to reflect. So really think about, like, what did I do really well in that interview? What was maybe challenging? That's going to give you some ideas of things that maybe you can improve on next time. The other thing you want to do is send a follow-up. So send an email thanking them within 24 to 48 hours. Make sure in that email, in your thank you, to say something that you learned or what you really appreciated from them. So more than, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciated the interview. Put something more personal in there. So think about what that might be. Also, if you forgot something that's really critical to that job that you forgot to mention or they don't know, you can put that in at this time. So this isn't a big paragraph. This is maybe, a 1 or 2 sentence thing that you forgot to mention that would be important to put in. So this would be the time to do it. And again, it's not a nice to have, it's something that would be really important that was left out. So best case scenario, you're hired, you got the job, you put in the hard work, congratulations, right? You're going to be starting this new career path. Now it's time to think about, how do you prepare for that? So making sure you have the right work attire, putting together all of your personal information, finding out what you need for your first day, ensuring you have transportation, and also thinking about your current schedule, if you're currently working or not, and making the proper accommodations so you can be the best candidates and showcase to them why they hired you. Another part of the interviewing process is looking at if you weren't selected, right? And this happens to everyone. It's a normal part of the interviewing process. So try not to take it personally, even though it feels personal a lot of the time. Try to see it as a learning opportunity. This is where you can reach out to them and ask them, how they felt you did in the interview process, and if there are things that they think that you could improve on. This is really helpful information. You're asking for feedback. They might not give it to you. You might not get a response, but you might. And if you do, that's really important information for your next interview. And again, it's remembering that everyone goes through this. Everyone's had interviews where they weren't the successful candidate. It's just a part of the process. So again, just recapping what we went over today, was preparing for the interview day, and post-interview. So I want you to think about those 3 areas. And again, circle back to this scale. Where had you originally put yourself on this scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least confident, 10 being 100% confident? What was the missing information you needed to take it 1 number higher? And think about if that missing information was maybe filled in today, and if some of those questions were answered. So that's the end of our presentation. We really want to open it up to you and the floor. Any questions that you have that we can help answer. Oh, Dawn, you're muted.
Sorry, I just was seeing Dan said he has a question, so I think he can unmute himself. That works, or we can. Okay, or he's texting, so we'll see. Do you want to put your question in the chat, Dan? We'll absolutely let you know if you've answered it or not. Well, Dan is putting that in. I'm just going to add one question. Now, this is a bold question that you can ask in an interview at the end when Roberta said those 3 to 5. And it is, you could end it and say at the end of the interview, is there any doubt in your mind as to why I'm not the best candidate for this position? And then they can say, well, yeah, this. And you can say, great, sorry, I forgot to give you this example. Or they might have to say, oh, we have to talk, and you say, no problem, but please let me know. So then that way it gives them permission to come back and talk to you, because a lot of times they won't come back, but if they promise, they will. So that's one thing. Okay, so Dan, let's see what we got. Here's the question, Roberta. Is it okay to admit you don't know the answer to a technical, or how should you approach a question that you honestly are unsure about? Great question. Do you want to lead that one?
Yeah, so if they ask you a question and maybe it's something technical that, yeah, you really don't know or haven't been trained in, you do want to answer honestly, right? So you do want to say, yes, I don't have that software training. However, I have a foundation of technical training in this. So think about what you are trained in that's maybe a foundation that they could build on, because you are going to have some skill sets for whatever that is, right? You may not have all of it, but you're going to have some kind of a foundation. So really try to connect back to what you do have that relates, and then how they can build on it from there.
Great. And you know what, just to add, because exactly, if you're at the table, you have met their minimum technical requirements, right? So they might ask a question to see what your depth and breadth is. The other thing and parts is like, how should I approach a question that you might not actually honestly know about? One is, okay, so if you didn't hear the question, it's okay to say, excuse me, could you repeat the question? And then they're just going to repeat it. However, if you understood or heard the question, but you didn't understand it, please make sure you say, you know what, I don't know that I really understand what you're asking. Would you be able to rephrase the question? So just make sure you make that distinction, because there's a difference between hearing it and understanding it. So make sure you do that. Another question we have is from an anonymous attendee. Question on references being put on a resume. I usually like to put to follow. So to avoid the reference being disturbed too much, is this appropriate? And 100%. That is my preferred way that you do it. Because then exactly you can prepare them and people aren't getting called. The other thing is it creates less bias, because sometimes the hiring manager might like, oh, they know John and they know this person, and right, or no, I don't like that person, and like, so it just creates another layer of bias. However, we are finding more common than before that they are asking for references up front. And when I've asked HR practitioners, they're just trying to get the package together at the front end, and then so they can share it out to the hiring committee. So if it's not on the job posting to include references, then don't. It's completely acceptable.
Yeah, that's a common question, and it's a good one that we get a lot.
Yeah, let's see if we've got another one. We got great presentation. Thank you for all the insightful information. Thank you. Is there any advice for interviewing for faculty positions that have multiple types of interviews over a period of time? It seems like an intensive process, and those who have been through these types of interviews often say how exhausting it can be, especially when always being on.
One thing I would say to keep in mind, and it sounds like maybe you've already done this, the person who posted the question, is talk to people who've gone through that process, right? So yes, they're saying it's exhausting. However, find out, now that they've gone through it, they can reflect back and see how they prepared for it, what worked for them, what some of the challenges were, because guaranteed after they've gone through it once, they're going to come away with some additional knowledge of how to be maybe more efficient, or how to be less exhausted going through that process. So things that they learned going through it. So get some of the tips and tricks from them, because they've gone through it. Talk to different people to get different perspectives who have gone through that process, because they're going to be the experts on it. They're the ones that have gone through it. So they really know kind of inside and out what's going to be helpful.
Great advice. And people love helping people. So reach out to somebody and then just say, here's what I'm doing, because everyone wants to set you up for success. And even again, whoever's interviewing you, the HR connection, to say, is there anyone that I can reach out to help me prepare and give me some insights. And they might be able to give you faculty names or other people that have gone through the process if you're newer to the process and don't have the connections. Don't be afraid to ask, because again, it's showing you're taking that initiative. You don't know something, but you're not just sitting back and allowing it to happen. It's like, I don't know, so I'm taking the initiative to find out and prepare. Those are all traits that check boxes that an employer is looking for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And LinkedIn can be a good place too, right? For kind of some
Yeah.
additional people to connect
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know where we are for time. Oh, we're 1:00 on the nose.
Yeah.
There you
So
go.
yes, thank you so much, Dawn and Roberta, for the great information and for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today and to be part of the Shift webinar. Thank you to all of you that attended and for all the great questions. At the end of May, we'll be hosting a panel of alumni who will discuss non-linear career paths. So make sure that you sign up ahead for that. Every student who is in attendance today who attends 3 out of our 4 sessions will receive a co-curricular credit on their record as well. So make sure that you sign up ahead of time, make sure that you attend because we do track. If you have any questions or feedback, please email us at alumni.artsandscience@usas.ca. And I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, and I hope to see virtually a lot of you at our next session. So thanks again to everyone that attended, and thank you, Dawn and Roberta.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.